Chapter 3. What does all this mean, Jovani? Why didn't you tell me you were married? I would never have consented to sleep with you. Forgive me. But I knew you would have turned away from me and gone with Justin, even if you loved me, because you thought that you would be the one to destroy a marriage. It's not a marriage in the sense of a man and woman. Not even in the manner that I want to marry you. I want children, and I love you more than my life, if you can call it that. I would die before I see harm come to you. You will never be happy with anyone but me, Hannah. Marry me and live your life with me. I would give up my immortal life if I could reverse it, to live out my life with you. Hannah turned away when he placed his cold hands on her face. You let me decide that. You took my options away when you placed me in danger with those witches and their mistress. You're selfish and cold, but I'm in love and I can't see what you are. Justin was right. Her words and tone cut deep through Jovani, leaving him weak and vulnerable to Lycell. Hannah walked away from Jovani and placed her clothes on and lowered her head. She felt ashamed as she dressed in front of him. Jovani, feeling the cold from her, turned to walk up the stairs. He could have disappeared through the door, but he tried to hide what he was, because he didn't want Hannah to feel any more repulsion about him, as she was now feeling. I'm going to assist Lycell in finding Justin. You can leave with him if you want to. But I wish you wouldn't. Jovani's voice no longer strong but weak. But only for her. The silence between them lasted long, and he thought he knew her feelings and thoughts, and then when she turned away, Jovani disappeared as quickly as he had appeared before her. Lycell gazing into the fire, his fingers strumming the arm of the overstuffed chair, waiting for Jovani to appear as the crackling fire roared in the fireplace. When he turned with a jerk after feeling a presence, he glanced over to his right and saw Jovani sitting in the wingback chair next to him. That chair belonged to Adrian, his mate. Jovani returned the gaze and sighed, looked over to Lycell and said, "We can leave now. But I have to bring Hannah to safety first." Lycell stood. "We don't have time. It will take too long. If something has happened to Justin, they first need to find out soon, or my pack will descend on this place, and I can't be responsible for what can happen next. They will not harm Hannah, but you are something else entirely." Jovani didn't appear worried. It was as if he had lost the will to exist. It showed in his eyes. He stared, not saying a word and not reacting as he did before. It was as if he said, "Come, put a stake into my heart, because there's nothing left for me. I died in that cellar when Hannah turned away from me." His face formless, his eyes cold and motionless, as he rose from the chair, looking at nothing and seeing everything. If Hannah remains here, she will be safe. We can leave now in the dark, and hopefully we will find Justin, and you can come back and rest in my cellar, and then take your woman and leave. I won't try anything when you sleep. What if we don't find him before the sun breaks? Then you come back here or find one of those caves around here. There are plenty. You can sleep there, and then return here to take Hannah with you. When I find Justin living or dead, I don't want her around him." Lycell's eyes closed for a second, realizing what he admitted to, that his son could be dead. Why else would he not come back to his home? "I may have no choice but to stay with you until we find your son. You were the one who told Hannah about Sasha, and now she wants nothing to do with me." Lycell raised an eyebrow and furrowed his brow into 3 rows. "Maybe it wasn't because of Sasha. Maybe it was you. Did you think about that? What are her choices? To sleep with you all day, and worry if she will see the night because she's hunted by a vampire and a witch. Not a good life for a human. I am the night. I can protect her. So could my son. If you loved her, you should have thought about her, and the life you are bringing her into." Those thoughts were always on my mind. Justin will find another, but I won't, and she won't. We are meant to be together. She's my life force and the mother of my children. Lycell reached for a poker rage building inside of him. He turned that rage on the fire as he feverishly stirred the embers. Then he turned facing Jovani, barely containing his fury, and said, "You mean to bring more vampires into this world? With a human?" Jovani stood alongside Lycell and quickly faced him. The tension surrounded the both of them like a field of electricity from a low cloud in the sky on a stormy day. "You married a human and brought more werewolves in the world. What right do you have to suggest that your kind should exist and not my kind?" Jovani's voice thundered through the cabin. And then there stood unbreakable silence between them. The silence echoed throughout the house. And it wasn't broken until Lycell said, "What are you planning for mankind? To bring into the world daywalkers?" His voice loud and strong. His tone filled with anger and contempt. Not even Jovani had considered the possibilities of his actions. "No. I want to give the world something that I'm not. Hannah is human, and she's the best I've found in mankind. She's trusting and forgiving, and I love her with all my being. I want to give back to humanity something good. And pay back all the sorrow I've caused." Lycell walked from him, turning his back on Jovani, but able to hear any movement he may make. He spotted Hannah standing in the doorway, looking on. She had been there listening. "If you're coming, then I suggest we get started," Lycell said, glaring into Hannah's trusting eyes. "What about Hannah? I can't leave her. She will be fine. I left word for Hunter to come after us if we're not back in a week. He will know what to do if we don't find Justin soon. She will be safe with him. He's my brother's firstborn. He will do what's necessary." Jovani didn't like the sound of "he will do what's necessary," and he didn't like the idea of another werewolf around him or Hannah. If they found Justin, he would have to contend with maybe 3 werewolves, who weren't exactly happy about the idea of a vampire taking over Justin's mate. But it was too late now, and they will have to get over the idea that Hannah was his. Before leaving, Jovani turned to see Hannah standing biting her nails in a nervous reaction to all the turmoil and confusion surrounding her. She thought she could hide how she felt about Jovani in her words, but her youthful face showed the love she held for him. Her heart carried out a different beat whenever he was near. One she couldn't disguise. Jovani the vampire had put his mark on Hannah, and anyone who came between a vampire and his pregnant wife would find that there would be no more nights for them. This would be their last night on this earth if anyone proved foolish enough to think that they could defy Jovani and take away what he had been waiting for all his mortal and immortal life, because he is the night, and he would make sure that they would see no more sunrises, no more twilights, and no more nights, because he will see that they take their last breath. Chapter 4. When Justin turned in a fetal position to warm his shivering body, he felt as if he had fallen into a deep hole that burned every part of him from his head to his feet, and then someone dropped a large bucket of ice water to cool him. This went on for hours, if not days. Through the ravage of fever and chills, he hunched against the cold walls of a cave, trying to find a normal position to sleep. But there was no normal position that he would be comfortable with, because he had never slept in a cave. He had been a werewolf brought up in comfort. An enormous ranch home in a penthouse apartment in New York. Not a fit place for a werewolf, his father had said. You need to be tough if you are going to carry on the Samsa's name. You need to be out in the wild to learn what werewolves may have to endure one day. It comes to us all, and it will come to you. Moving around without feeling any relief, after the ravages of fever accompanied by a wave of cold covering his body, he moaned and groaned out loud, talking to his father, who wasn't there. This illness from the wound on his leg had given him intense pain and suffering. The life-threatening fever persisted for days and nights as he would drift awake, then into unconsciousness. Curled into a ball, howling in his sleep, not knowing if his father would hear his cry of help, he suffered alone, and unheard in a dark, dank cave. Lycell would have been there if he had overheard his last pup moaning for his help, but even Lycell's hearing wasn't that good. Justin woke for a few moments and mumbled incoherently into the air. "Mother! Mother!" His voice sounds that of a child calling out for help. Thrashing about, biting into the air, fighting in his sleep, confused by the fever brought on by his injuries he incurred from the trap he had stepped into, almost severing his leg as he stalked a large buck. He didn't know how long he could go on like this. During a time of clarity, Justin remembered he left Hannah alone because he thought by now he would have killed the male deer and headed back to the cabin to be with her. But the best laid plans of mice and men go astray. And so did this werewolf's plans. He felt himself slipping into nothingness, and he looked pale and gray. His leg looked worse black. He concluded that he would not be alive come tomorrow to make any plans. Tonight would be his last night. Stirring around, he felt the rocks and gravel cut into his flesh, and the dry leaves prickle his skin. He couldn't imagine he would be sleeping in a cave after the comfort of his brother's home and his father's ranch in Nevada. Those were wonderful times romping with his older brothers when they would take him out on a hunt with their newborn pups. He was the last of his father's sons, and there would be no females, and because he was the baby in the pack, he had been coddled, and everything had been made easy for him. Lycell, his father, had cautioned his brothers about not allowing Justin to hunt when they were with them, and kill his own food. Lycell thought that a werewolf's life was difficult enough, and to not know the ways of his father and his father's father before him would be disastrous to his young son. On Justin's first hunt, the brothers had brought in more than enough fresh meat, and Justin didn't see why he had to even accompany them on a hunt. However, Lycell insisted that he go. You have to develop the survival skills of being a werewolf. You can't just want to exist in a man's world. If they discover you're not one of them, they will hunt you and the pack down, and the family will have to go into the wilderness to survive. You need to be ready because that day may come, Lycell would say to him, and that lecture would become part of the pack's mantra and part of Justin's joke whenever he would tell the story. Wilder and Drayton would tell their sons, and Lycell drummed it into Justin's mind. Even as he slept, he could hear his father's voice. He wished he had listened. With his hands shaking and wrapped around him, and the pain arising from his leg all through his body, there was no getting comfortable, at least not for Justin. He thought about the warmth of the fire in his mother's home, and what she was doing now. Did she miss him because he missed her terribly? Would she scream and blame others for his death when she would be told of his demise? It was a painful thought picturing his mother and how she would wail and blame his father, so he closed his eyes and tried to think of better times, but the uncomfortable feeling and pains throughout his body wouldn't allow him to think of better things. If only the headache would go away, and the thumping in his leg and knee. He thought he smelled the infection setting in. It had the smell of rotting flesh. He tried licking it, but that made it worse. I should be cold, he whispered. His voice weak and strained. Why then am I sweating? He wiped his face with his hand, as large droplets of sweat fell covering him like water on a spring day. Murmuring breathless into the empty cave, where only he was there to answer, and he did, and found that he had been dreaming, and now awake. As a cold wind blew in more wet leaves, he shivered. He had nightmares all night, and woke to the darkness of the cave. Looking around, he realized that he had not been in the warmth of a home, and in his bed. He smelled the dampness and the mildew of the walls of the cave when he put his arm out to touch what he had sensed. Then he looked through the darkness to see the whiteness of the snow piled high reflecting inside the cave, the only light showing. It was night. When he entered the cave to get out from the cold, it was day. Now it wasn't. Struggling to get to his feet, he groaned and looked down where the pain had shot through him like a hot poker searing his leg. He became alarmed at the sight of seeing where the bone made an intrusion through his flesh. A bloody mess of skin turning black and festering. Near his leg, the remnants of a wolf trap. A trap with little worth but to cripple and then kill any animal who would step into it. He had been that unlucky, stupid animal, he thought. How had he been that careless or stupid, he wondered. Wasn't he paying attention to his brothers and father on their hunts? Hadn't he heard one word of their warnings about traps set by men to destroy wolves, which would make werewolves vulnerable to the snares as well? Justin grimaced when another sharp pain like lightning struck, and this time it drew tears in his eyes. It wasn't a poker or lightning that had seared him and turned his flesh colors. His leg had swollen and he had a fever, and if only he had a red-hot poker, it would be a lifesaver now. The first thought churning through Justin's mind is that he could be disabled. He could see himself now hobbling along instead of running. A werewolf needed his legs, and here he was getting ready to lose his mobility, or worse, lying there and waiting to die.